chosen by me.
Another Gold Star father who is much more private about his grief is Professor Andrew Bacevich of Boston University. A career military man, he graduated from West Point. His son Andrew was killed in Iraq in 2007, and while he's private about that, he's very vocal about the war.
And it's long past time for us to end our involvement there.
Bacevich served 23 years in the Army and has written extensively on the Bush Doctrine and the Iraq War. He believes that the U.S. invasion and occupation has worsened the situation in the Middle East.
It has increased the level of instability. It has enhanced the power and influence of Iran. And it has increased anti-Americanism, inflamed anti-Americanism.
Bacevich won't speak about his own grief in losing his son, but he does speak to the cost of war in lives and $1 trillion.
The money, of course, is almost incidental if we think in terms of the number of soldiers who've lost their lives and those that have been wounded. The country has paid a heavy, heavy, heavy price for this war. For me personally, I find it very difficult to make an argument that says that the price we've paid anywhere met by what we've gained.
Now, as you heard, both men clearly have a lot of questions about the war in Iraq, but both men tell us that they are fiercely proud of their sons and their service. Hardeep?
Scott, the president says he's bringing the troops back from Iraq, but he is adding troops to the effort in Afghanistan. Did either man tonight express misgivings about that?
Well, that's interesting that you should ask that, because both men did express misgivings about that, both Carlos Arredondo and Andrew Bacevich. Bacevich is very worried that the trouble that we will be leaving behind in Iraq is trouble that will be starting, redoubling our efforts in Afghanistan. He's afraid that the president may be biting off more than he can chew, but he is, again, happy to see that the troops are being drawn down from Iraq, as is Mr. Arredondo.
Scott Kemp tonight in Boston. Back to you.
Lights, please. There was one thing let me add about Dr. Bacevich. My husband and I, which we'll talk about a little bit later, we've gone out of our way to really get to know a lot of the Gold Stars across the country, but especially in Massachusetts. And wouldn't you know that we knew this family prior to them losing their son. And on top of that, their son is buried in the same small community cemetery where our son is. Many of you remember the story of Pat Tillman. Though a very private woman by nature, Mary Tillman did go and put down the information of the whole investigation and how the story of her son was manipulated in the media, and wrote a book, Ground by Dusk, my tribute to Pat Tillman. And in this book she sets the record straight as well as she can, talking about the child she raised, the man he became, and the inaccurate information flow from the Pentagon officials. And her family and friends have put together a very large foundation. It's one of the largest that I've noticed, the Tillman Foundation. They've given out more than 24 just this first year awards to children, including those of the fallen, so that they can have alternatives to the military in terms of their education. And may I add that she's done that on top of the fact that she was raised in a military family, so it's pretty formidable. Okay. This is another family from Massachusetts. John, Alma, and Brian Hart. They lost their son early in the war. And the main reason that they lost their son is because the Humvees were not protected. And in his last phone conversation home to his family, John said, "I'm concerned. These Humvees aren't protected. We're just, we're just out here for shooting practice." And sure enough, this is what led to him and several of his comrades dying. But once again, why don't we let them themselves. No, I did not cue that up, did I?